at least the microphone will be below my chin this way, right? So the topic I'm going to present on today is Flatley's Law. No one's heard of Flatley's Law, I presume. And it was a revolution that took place without us knowing about it. Flatley's Law relates to advancements in DNA sequencing. And in our lifetimes, that has had a fantastic transformation. And to start this presentation, I want to apologize because I'm going to get to Flatley's Law in the middle of my presentation. But my presentation starts off with a law that many of you may have heard of, Moore's Law. And Moore's Law, I'm going to spend a slide talking about Moore's Law. And really, Flatley's Law depends upon Moore's Law in terms of really understanding the impact of this development that's taken place. So with that, just briefly, Moore's Law. In 1965, this fellow Gordon Moore, he was the founder of Intel, and as he's running this business, he's realizing that things are going pretty fast there at Intel, and so he made this prediction. He said the number of active components on a silicon chip seem to be doubling about every 2 years, and really our costs aren't going up. And so that was his prediction. That's Moore's Law, that every 2 years capacity will double. There's a corollary to that too, and that is, well, if the costs aren't going up and the capacity's doubling, we can say that really the costs are getting cut in half every 2 years. And so that's the corollary to Moore's Law. And this is a chart that Gordon was looking at the time. He basically had a few data points in 1965 that said, hey, here it is, it's doubling. This is a log chart. So when you see a straight line on a log chart, that kind of indicates arithmetic growth. So having a slope of 2 there, that indicates that things are doubling for about the last 5 time periods that he was looking at. Well, as it turns out, this is Moore's Law, taken out 120 years from before Gordon's time to the time of the silicon chip. So this actually goes back to 1902, but this is really talking about the doubling time of the arithmetic calculation of a device. So in the first part of this, we have adding machines with the hand crank typing the numbers using gears. And we can see the slope of that curve is pretty flat. So that really the adding machines weren't evolving or becoming that much faster, more capable as time went on. Then all of a sudden someone said, well, what if we use switches? What if we use relays or vacuum tubes? And so that's this period here. And you can see the line kind of got a little steeper. And that worked great. But then around the 65 era, they started doing these silicon chips, and Gordon Moore came into it. And here's where Moore's Law really took off. And you can see that the slope went up dramatically. And so that kind of became the gold standard for technological development. It doesn't look like much when you look at it as a graph like this, but basically what Gordon predicted ended up to be 35% growth every year for 55 years. So that's a really incredible achievement in terms of computational power. And up until that time, we thought that, well, that no one can surpass that, growing at that fast rate. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk about DNA sequencing. And that really starts with the Human Genome Project. So when I was going to college, when I was graduating from college, this crazy guy was making the rounds and trying to raise money for this project that he had in mind called the Human Genome Project. That's James Watson, and one of the members of the audience actually didn't want to go out on a date with this guy because he was kind of a creep. But he helped discover the pattern for the double helix for DNA, and then later he tried to raise money for this Human Genome Project. And he, at that time, when he was talking to me at the presentation, me and all the other people in the audience, it was 5 times this size here, he was basically relating it to the the moon launch of our times, because the technology that was available for DNA sequencing was very slow at that time. And so he said it might take, to sequence one person's genome, it might take the lifespan of several generations of humans to sequence this one person's genome. And basically, a human genome has about 3.2 billion nucleotides or bases in it. And at this time, it would take a day or more to sequence one. So it was a very, very long process. But there was huge value in it, and our government saw fit to fund this Human Genome Project. And so he started the project, and they finished it 13 years later. Because what happened was a new type of sequencing technology came along called Sanger sequencing, which is much faster than what we had before. And so it was a fantastic achievement. You know, everybody clapped. It didn't take 2 lifetimes. It only took 13 years. It took the efforts of 20 separate research universities and institutions to do it. They all basically took a small part of the project. You do this little bit, and then the next one did the bit next to it, and so forth, to sequence the whole genome. And it was a huge, huge effort. One person's genome was published after that, and it was James Watson's genome. They cloned his cells and used his DNA for the project. Sadly, they released his genome second. They lost the race. They were actually, in order to release his genome second, it cost $3 billion to get just Watson's genome. The reason they lost the race is because of the competition. This guy came along, and he, during that 13-year period where they're trying to sequence the genome, he said, I've got a better technology. And so he had a whole new technology called shotgun sequencing. And his sequencing allowed very small fragments of the DNA to be read and copied and then compared in order to map out the whole genome. It was a much faster approach for DNA sequencing. So he started the race halfway through and finished first. And the reason he did that was because he really wanted to patent our DNA. Everything he discovered, he wanted to hold a patent on it so that he could then license that and make money off of that. And so he spent far less money than the actual project, spent $300,000 to sequence his genome. And then the rug got pulled out from underneath him. Our Supreme Court ruled that just discovering someone's DNA is not a patent-worthy event. You have to have some additional technology involved in changing the DNA or modifying it. So they never made the money. But definitely transformed our world. And now, finally, after all this time, I get to Flatley's law. And so with Flatley, he came along later yet. So in 2007, his company had a merger with several companies that were put together and formed this company, Illumina. And in full disclosure, I worked for Illumina, but it was after 2007. So I worked for Illumina for about 6 years. I knew Jay, actually. And so what Illumina did was they discovered yet another DNA sequencing technology. So we've gone from Edmond degradation to Sanger sequencing to shotgun sequencing, and now Illumina, Flatley, sequencing by synthesis. And that's currently the DNA sequencing that most of our stuff gets done by today. And so in 2007, he started doing this sequencing, and in 2014, we managed to get the cost down so much that where it cost $3 billion for Watson's DNA a few decades earlier, now it costs less than $1,000 to sequence someone's DNA. So it's a huge cost savings, and even today, sequencing someone's whole genome is less than $300. Now, I know you guys are probably familiar with something called 23andMe. That actually Illumina makes those chips too, but that only looks at about 10% of the genome. It doesn't look at your whole genome. So the human genome is much larger than what something 23andMe would do. So anyway, 2014, the first $1,000 genome was launched. And so now I'm going to show you a chart of Flatley's law. So the light blue curve, the straight line, that is Moore's law. That's the fastest we thought technology could possibly develop over time. In Flatley's law, 2017, we switched from Sanger sequencing to sequencing by synthesis, and you can see the cost of DNA sequencing rapidly dropped down. And you know, none of us are DNA people, so this doesn't really apply to us, does it? I mean, this is something that's happening someplace else. You know, how does it really apply to us? Well, here are some of the drugs that have been developed because of this rapid expansion in our ability to sequence DNA. Many of these drugs we might take here in this room, but as we look at the first column, the left column, those are small molecules that are used to bind to DNA and also proteins. 68 of them have been developed since 2007. And then the middle one, most of those things existed before, but many of them have been improved because of DNA sequencing. And the one at the very top of the list was kind of critical for most of us. It's the COVID vaccine. In fact, most of the COVID research uses that platform to sequence the COVID virus to see what particular variant you have. The third column over, MIDs, they're protease inhibitors, and those aren't necessarily, they're more therapeutic drugs for suppressing symptoms. But the final column is really where most of the drugs are developed, and those are monoclonal antibodies. And that's where a DNA sequence is actually plugged into a bacteria and grown to create antibodies that can respond to various ailments that we might have. So I just put this eye chart up here to illustrate the vast quantity of them. But the thing I really want to point out is that in the 216 months since Flatley's law came about, since we got the $1,000 genome, every single month, at least 3 new drugs were developed, and that is accelerating. So most of our medical conditions that we're receiving treatment for today, the drugs weren't available before 2007. So it had a huge, huge impact on our lives, even if we didn't know about it. And it's also the reason why we hear all these stupid commercials on television with the crazy songs that you can't get out of your head. But that's not the end of it. So that's our direct benefit. But there are other benefits too, and this list goes on and on and on. There's actually new businesses and entirely new industries that are popping up every month based upon our genome and understanding our DNA. I'm going to introduce a few here, but there are many, many more. The first one is a PGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. And I hope this doesn't offend too many people here, but you'd be surprised to know that in IVF, when they're doing in vitro fertilization, they usually create more embryos than they implant. And the reason for that is that when they're making these embryos, not all of them are fit to go to term. Many of the embryos would never have implanted and are not viable. And so for about 30 years during IVF, they didn't really understand which fertilized embryos, which zygotes were healthy and which ones were not healthy. And so because IVF is such an expensive treatment, they realized that the unhealthy ones, by and large, wouldn't necessarily catch, and the healthy zygote would catch. And so it was a common practice to introduce 2 eggs during IVF, hoping that one would stick. Well, it turned out that we had a huge upswing in the number of twins being born for the last 30 years. And I don't want to name names or point out, but I think you'd find that when you look at those twins, one of them might be normal, and one of them may not be so normal. So we had a higher incidence in birth defects. So with PGD, what they do is After about 40 cell divisions, when the zygote gets to a certain size, they can harvest a single cell off of that zygote and not affect the baby, and genetically test that zygote to see if it has birth defects, to see if it can carry to term. Also, you can do trait selection, sex, trait selection, eye color, hair color, which is a very controversial topic. You can certainly avoid birth defects. That's mainly what it's for, so you don't end up with a genetic disorder in your implanted baby. And then also, kind of another controversy, it can actually grant defects. There are parents that are both deaf that want their children to be deaf. Yeah, how about that? That's an interesting one. So it's a very, very controversial topic, but it's one thing people don't think about with IVF now. It's actually really improved, believe it or not, improved the success rate for in vitro fertilization. Now they only have to fertilize one egg, one good egg, and so they don't have the complications associated with it. They also have a higher success rate in terms of implantation. So that's one thing that's come about from the expansion of DNA sequencing. Another thing is gene therapy. You have a genetic disorder, they have a cure for you now. Just about 10 years ago now, there was a lady that had sickle cell anemia. They took some of her cells out of her body, they edited her cells genetically, put them back into her, cured sickle cell anemia, edited her genes. So in 2023, the FDA approved that now, and there's a company that's selling that, but they're not stopping with sickle cell anemia. The next one is hemophilia, and they're working on to all sorts of other genetic disorders. Pretty soon, I believe it will become a customizable feature. And this is really critical because a large percentage of our population has rare diseases. I don't know if you heard about the Rare Disease Foundation, but rare diseases, they call them rare because they might only affect 100, 1,000 people in the world. But it turns out that there's so many of them that almost 10% of the population is afflicted by some form of rare disease, genetic disease. Many, many different kinds, small numbers of people are affected by these. So this holds huge promise, specifically for juvenile cancers. Cancer in children and infants is predominantly caused by a genetic disorder that could be cured by gene editing. So a huge, huge potential for the future. And now we get into the controversial stuff. Genetically modified organisms. And it seems so tame. It starts out very tame. Right now, pigs, their genes have been edited to grow human organs. Right now, there are people that are receiving organ transplants that are human kidneys that were grown in a pig. And that's a huge breakthrough. It's only kidneys right now, but you can imagine next will be livers. I don't know at what point they call a pig an animal and what point they call it a human, but there's going to be huge controversy with organ growth in pigs and harvesting human organs from these pigs. De-extinction is a huge topic right now, where they're looking at samples from animals that have gone extinct and using DNA technology to bring them back, to bring back the carrier pigeon, to bring back the dodo, to bring back the woolly mammoth. Huge efforts going on to try to de-extinct animals that we've lost, which brings us to the greatest extinction of all, which is to reverse evolution. There's a guy right now that's trying to use a chicken. The DNA of a chicken has many of the codes in it for dinosaur. And so he's trying to make his own dinosaur, a chicken with teeth, a chicken with scales. It's a wild and fun project to think about that the code for a dinosaur exists within a living animal, but it does, it's in there. So that's an ongoing project that's a little controversial. But then we get into other controversy. So this Craig Venter guy that lost the money, that won the race but didn't get to cash out. So these next three are Craig's projects. These are what they're working on now. So he's working on transforming cells where he actually artificially strings out the DNA of one organism and then implants it into a different organism and transforms that organism into the one that he implanted. So it turns organism A into organism B by plugging its DNA in. Synthetic life, we call that. And then his last big one is I forgot also with synthetic life. He's identified new nucleotides that aren't the nucleotides of our DNA. Our DNA has A, T, C, and G. He's got X, Q, M, and L nucleotides that actually were interfaced with our human DNA, creating synthetic life that isn't based upon our nucleotides, isn't based upon our amino acids. And then the last one's fantastic, Craig did, which was the teleporter, Star Trek teleporter. He actually used a DNA sequencer on one end. They gave him an organism that he didn't know what it was, and he sequenced the DNA of that organism, brought it into the computer, sent it across the world to Europe, where a DNA sequencer existed, sequenced that DNA that he read off the organism, recreated the organism that was in San Diego, and that organism lived and reproduced. So he's actually transported an organism from one place to another. Now, the whole concept of ensoulment comes in. I don't know if the soul went with it, but the fact is that something existed in one place, and he made it exist in another place via electronics. So I think I'd like to conclude my presentation here. I do have one more slide. I'll just briefly go through it quickly. What does the future hold for kids? And y'all remember The Graduate, where the guy told him plastics, Dustin Hoffman doing plastics. Well, the new graduate is bioinformatics. And that's the field where all of these points coalesce to have a greater understanding of our DNA sequencing. And Flatley's law made it all happen, made DNA sequencing affordable and available to everyone. Oxford Nanopore right now sells a DNA sequencer that's about as big as my thumb and plugs into your laptop. So if you wanted to do this stuff, they've got the equipment for you to do it. So thank you very much. Now, we finished quite a bit early, so we do have time for questions. Yeah, Wayne, why don't you come close so that we can answer any questions people might have. Also, at lunchtime, the Great Decisions Group will be meeting again, and the hot topic right now is negotiating in sovereignty without the country that you're negotiating about. So, in case you haven't known, Ukraine is not part of the negotiations going on right now in Saudi Arabia between the U.S. and Ukraine.
This is Ken, and this isn't a question, it's a compliment. There's sort of three great scientific presentations, and I really enjoyed them.
This is for Mark. A lot of great information that you put together there. I may have missed it, but basically, in layman's terms, what is the DNA sequencing? I mean, for very layman like me.
Sure. Well, our DNA is basically a long string. I like to think about it as a zipper. And if you were to take the DNA in one of your cells, it's about 3.5 feet long. If you unwrap it and stretch it out. And inside that zipper, you've got teeth that hold the zipper together. And there's two types of teeth, two sets of teeth. There's A and T teeth, and there's C and G teeth. And the sequence of those teeth communicate to our cells all sorts of information. They communicate information for making RNA or for making proteins. And so understanding the sequence of those teeth is really breaking the code of life and what this DNA stuff is doing. So I hope that, does that, okay, yeah. Yeah.
This is Bill. Mark, I wonder if you have any insight on this. You talk about Flatley and the acceleration and all of the new drugs that are coming out. a lot of money has been claimed for R&D on drugs. Does this suggest a new direction that maybe some of the drug prices might go down?
Well, it's a very expensive process. I can tell you that even though the cost of sequencing has gone down, so many other costs are very, very high. And also bringing a drug to market is a hugely expensive thing. So even though one part of that process has become cheaper, the other parts still remain. So I think a lot of that has to do with upon the complexity of the manufacturing process. So like a drug like insulin is relatively cheap compared to some of the cancer drugs. Well, a lot of that has to do with scale. You know, there's a lot more people that need insulin than need a specific cancer drug. So if you're going to cover all your costs for this rare cancer, you're going to have to raise the price to balance things out. So economies of scale kind of factor into these things. But basically every ailment that we have, there's someone that's trying to make money off of it. So the 3 drugs per month, I said that's accelerating. We could start seeing 5 drugs a month, and I can only imagine how much worse the jingles are going to get. I mean, it's atrocious right now, and they're butchering a lot of classic songs that they have no business touching.
Thank you. This is Joan. My question is for Mark. The question is based on my memory, and so feel free to say, that didn't happen, Joan. Several people tell me that sort of thing. I think relatively early on in the Watson genome sequencing project, somebody, possibly Watson himself, they had identified some genes and they had sequenced them and stuff like that, but there were a whole bunch that they hadn't. And somebody was saying, well, those don't matter, they're junk DNA, or, and it sort of like, well, if we can't identify them, they don't matter. Is that gone from this process? Have they identified all of them?
No, junk DNA is still a thing. Remember the chicken guy trying to make a dinosaur out of a chicken? That's junk DNA that he's looking at. So the DNA that's in our cell, only about 9% of it actually does anything. 9% of our DNA does anything. The other 91% is junk DNA, like Joan's talking about. And really, what that is our history, our cellular history. We share about 40% of the DNA that E. coli has in our cells. So that's all part of our cellular phylogeny. There's a word for our philologists, phylogeny, our tree, our cellular tree. And so yes, a lot of that DNA, that junk DNA, had a function in the past, but we're not using it right now. So they say, well, that doesn't matter. But it turns out that when that junk DNA mutates, well, all of a sudden it starts mattering. And then it starts causing things like cancer. So many of our cancers actually hit those parts of the genome that don't actually do anything, but once it mutates, it sure does. So that's you're right. That's the truth of it. Yeah.
Hey, Mark, it's Lily. What about AI in terms of your the curve of development? Did you look into how it's that going to affect the speed as well as the cost? Definitely
did. And unfortunately, it's only a 10-minute presentation. That's a huge, huge topic right now. To give you an idea, on a 1 terabyte hard drive for your laptop, at Illumina, we can only fit 10 people's genomes on that one hard drive. Massive amounts of data, really big data. The first time I ever crashed Microsoft Excel was when I tried to download the smallest chromosome, the smallest human chromosome, into Excel. Couldn't handle it. Crashed Excel. I'd never crashed Excel before. I've been using Excel for a very long time. So AI is absolutely vital in looking at all this massive data, and there's been a huge breakthrough that just happened about 2 years ago where AI was able to look at a protein sequence, the sequence of bases in a protein, and determine what shape it would take. And all of a sudden, it used to be really hard to figure out what shape a protein was. in a very short span of time, AI figured all of it out. So every single shape, you throw a protein shape at AI, it can tell you what a protein sequence, it'll tell you what shape it is. It did something like a 2 billion proteins in like a month. So yeah, AI's been massive, and it will continue to be massive to do some of this bioinformatics, for sure.
Okay. Hi, this is for Mark. Hi, I'm Barbara. I was really struck by the teleport part.
Wasn't that wild?
Yeah, and
Wasn't that wild?
I was thinking, and you probably thought along these lines too, about having like the ingredients of life, sticking them in a capsule, shooting them out there into the galaxies, and then, back on Earth, pressing the button to recreate that life. So you wouldn't have to sustain it on the trip, but you could just make it in situ.
Fantastic
Did you
sci-fi
think
to
about?
Well, I'll tell you what.
I
The
know.
guy that gets the credit for the idea you're talking about right now is a guy named John von Neumann, a hugely controversial figure in our history, involved in the Manhattan Project. But that was his idea. Let's send stuff out, and we'll program it to take over the world. His idea was, don't send men to space, send these little bots, send these little microscopic bots. Absolutely fantastic. The other thing about the teleporter, believe it or not, they were trying to get that onto the Mars probe. The reason that Craig did that was he said, well, hey, I'll put one of these DNA sequencers in the little robot on the Mars probe, and whatever we find there, I'll get the sequence of it. We beam it back to Earth, and we can make it in the lab, so we can bring Martians to the planet. But it took up too much space. They couldn't make it work. But that was why Craig was doing it. It's like, I want to get on that little robot, So, yeah. I met Craig a few times too, in case you can't tell.